Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Breaker 19, here's Rubber Duck, your host of Tech Talks Daily, where every day I explore the impacts that technology is having on a different industry. And today I want to learn more about the supply chain and trucking industry that we all take for granted, and how that industry is leveraging data analytics to react to the global pandemic in real time and keep those much needed goods moving. So today's guest led an initiative to supply truckers with real-time alerts about COVID-19 cases in the regions that they were driving through, as well as updating on stay-at-home orders, mask requirements, and restaurants and rest stop closures. And that list goes on because there are so many critical areas where technology is proving critical in this industry. So with all that in mind, I invited Mick from Omnitracs onto the podcast to learn more about how they are connecting drivers, vehicles, managers and customers to help carriers and providers grow their business and keep those essential products moving around the country and indeed world. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Chicago so we can speak with Mick now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks, Neil, for having me on the show today. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Michal Yariv, but most people call me Mick. It's just a little bit easier. I've been building technology in the transportation and travel sectors for the last 25 years. And I currently head up the Innovation Center at Omnitracs. If you're not in the transportation space, which I imagine many of your users are not, you might never have heard of Omnitracs or know what we do. So I'll just give you a little bit of background of who we are. We build technology for the commercial trucking industry. And in fact, Omnitracs was the name of the first product that was built by Qualcomm, the semiconductor company, about 30 years ago, so in the late 80s. And they introduced the first satellite tracking systems for commercial trucks. And that was revolutionary 30 years ago. We've come a long way since then. But 30 years ago, we didn't have the processing power or the storage capability to be able to leverage the data that these systems produced. So today we call these things IoT devices, Internet of Things. But 30 years ago, it was the first hardware that was being put into trucks to be able to track them through a satellite network and understand where those trucks were at any given moment. So what my group does is we take the data that comes from all of these trucks that are out there in the world, and we try to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data engineering practices to remove friction for the trucking industry and bring insights to them.
And I'm glad you mentioned Qualcomm. They were on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that I always try and do on this Daily Tech podcast is try and appreciate a little bit more some of the technology that's going on all around us, but we all take for granted. And you did say a few moments ago that possibly not everyone listening is going to be from the transport space, which of course they're not, but everyone's been on transport of some description and probably blissfully unaware of some of the technology that's keeping everything in the world going, whether it be supply chains or just that commute to the office. But can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving with technology, just to set the scene for everyone listening?
Yeah, Neil, that's a great description, because until you get into the trucking industry, you blissfully pass by trucks on the highway all the time without really giving much thought to kind of the complexities around shipments and how they get, from a manufacturing center, to your desk, to your dinner table. So there's some really cool and interesting problems that we are trying to solve for with this technology. And I think the recent pandemic shed some light on this, maybe to people who hadn't been thinking about it previously. So the first time somebody went to a store and there was no toilet paper there anymore, all of a sudden supply chains came into focus. And I think people are now keenly aware of the importance of trucking in just keeping our countries going. Some of the problems that we're trying to solve for take place during that transit when a truck driver is trying to get a shipment from point A to point B. And there are so many things that can happen during that trip. So from the time that they go and pick up, let's say it's a load of toilet paper, to the time that they take it to the distribution center for your local supermarket, there are a bunch of events that could happen that could delay or derail that shipment. So there are things of a regulatory nature. So for example, trucks need to stop at way stations along the highway. We see these as cars and we just drive right past them, but that introduces delay for trucks. There's hours of service regulations, which drivers are regulated by the number of hours that they can drive in a given day. Then there's environmental factors, so traffic and weather delayed or human issues. So people at a warehouse may be called in sick on a day, and now the warehouse is running behind. So if you think about all of the factors that go into whether a shipment is going to make it to its destination on time, there are a number of them, and we think that most of them are actually predictable. That if you have the right type of data and a large amount of it, that we could predict these things. And in being able to predict them, we can help in the planning process and help smooth out all of that friction for the driver by warning them in advance of things that they might experience on the road.
And I'm glad you used the toilet paper example there, because I think it's something on wherever anybody's listening, they've all seen that panic buying for toilet paper. But I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about the supply chain and the trucking industry and how it's leveraging this data analytics to actually react to the pandemic in real time and keep those much needed goods moving this year? Because again, you guys are the unsung heroes, aren't you?
Well, not me. Yeah, but I think the drivers are, right? Yeah. At times where we were all holed up in our homes and trying to quarantine or stay away from people, it was the drivers that were out there still having to make those deliveries and putting themselves at risk. So, if anybody is the hero during these times to keep the economy moving, keep our lives moving, it really is the drivers behind the wheel. And what we can do is help them with technology to make that an easier task for them. So, yeah, overnight we saw shocks to supply chains, and we saw it in the data as well. So the toilet paper is a great example, but there were also lots of other places that were impacted by the pandemic. Some of them negatively, and some of them actually positively. Right. So in our business, we work across a lot of different types of trucking. So we work with the long haul truckers. We also work with last mile truckers, where they're actually making kind of those final mile deliveries. So we had customers, for example, that were delivering meals to senior centers to make sure that they continued to get food during this time. And so we saw this across all of these segments, and what it tells you, really, it just reinforces how important trucking is and what an indicator it is for the overall economy. So, for example, in our data, we were able to see areas of the country that were showing those spikes and areas that were showing dips based on the types of commodities and types of industries that they service. And we were able to use those to help in conversations nationwide around what was happening actually on the ground.
And I believe that you also led an initiative to supply those truckers with real-time alerts about COVID-19 cases in regions that they were driving through, as well as updates on stay-at-home orders, mask requirements, and restaurants and rest stop closures. Can you share the story behind that? Because, again, a lot of this is unseen by a lot of people.
Absolutely. So, again, while we were all at home, the drivers had to work within these environments that were constantly changing. So if you remember back to the early days of the pandemic, regulations about what you could do and where were changing all the time. And if you think about drivers where they're crossing those state and county boundaries, those regulations change for them at any given moment's notice. And so what we did was we said, how can we take that data and get it to the drivers in real time when they need it? And so we were able to look at the data that was being published by organizations like Johns Hopkins University and their COVID tracking center, and be able to provide warnings to drivers when they were approaching areas that had high incidence of COVID infections, new infections. We were also then able to provide them with information about how they needed to work in those spaces. So did they need a mask? Were people quarantined? Were their large gatherings allowed? Were restaurants open? Things like that. And because we have that technology in the truck, we could provide this information to the driver exactly when they needed it. So in the case of COVID alerts, we can see the direction that the truck is moving. We see the speed that they're moving at. And so we can calculate when exactly they would need that alert and then send them that information in a just-in-time way. And that was really helpful to drivers in keeping them informed about what was happening on the ground in the places they needed to service.
Love that. And before you came on today, I was also doing a little bit of research on the kind of work that you're doing. And I also learned that you're leveraging location intelligence by unlocking data insights that can provide information about mechanics, food and rest stations, and so much more. Can you expand on that for me as well?
Sure. That's some of the most exciting work that we're doing is really around location intelligence. And all of these things really have some sort of location component to them, the COVID-19 alerts, but also things like where there's a rest area available, where a driver can stop to get food, things like that. That data, there's nothing really new about that data. It's existed for a long time. What we're doing, though, is saying, how can we use that in a smarter way to make it a seamless experience for the driver? So, for example, a driver could today go and look up on a website and see where nearest rest stops are in an area they're going to be going to. But if we think about how we integrate that into the whole driver's experience, we can surface that information when the driver needs it. So, for example, if you think about, the driver's hours of service. Hours of service is a term that we give to the regulations around how long a driver can be driving for, how long they need to then take a rest break for, how long they need to sleep, and so on. And as part of the technology that we provide to trucking companies, we provide them applications that help them manage those hours of service. So if you imagine a world in which we know that you're running out of hours to drive, in fact, before you even leave for the day, we can tell you where you'll be when you're going to run out of hours to drive. Then we can integrate that with location intelligence and find you the best place for you to pull over or for you to stop when you're going to run out. And it can just help you plan your day better. And I think in this way, this is what we're seeing, is that we can really help the industry move to a more predictive model where things aren't surprising us, right? We're not running out of gas in the middle of a stretch of the highway where there's no gas station. It's all predictable. We just need to build the models and then serve it to the drivers in real time.
And I think I'm also right in saying that you can also calculate how long truckers are likely to spend in warehouses and where they need to go within those locations. And for people outside of the industry, can you just expand on the kind of business value that something like that can offer?
Yeah, that is a huge issue for the trucking industry. If you're in the trucking industry, everybody talks about this issue. It's called detention. If you're not in the industry, I'll explain it really briefly. Essentially, if a driver shows up to an appointment at a warehouse and they show up on time, if they're not serviced within 2 hours, we call that detention. And it's kind of like if you showed up to a doctor's appointment and you had a 9 a.m. appointment and the doctor doesn't see you until 11 a.m., you'd be pretty angry, you'd be pretty frustrated. But what if we could tell you in advance that you were going to have to wait, right? It makes it a totally different experience if I know that the doctor is running late and maybe I'll bring a book with me and I'll sit and read in the waiting room and that's okay. This is what happens with drivers on a daily basis right now, where they stop at a particular location to either pick up a load or deliver a load, and they're being held up there. And besides just kind of the frustration around not being serviced on time, there's a huge financial component for drivers. So drivers get paid generally by the number of miles that they've driven. They get paid a rate per mile. So if they're not driving and they're being held up somewhere, they're not making money. And recent studies have called out that this is about a $1.1 to $1.3 billion loss to drivers directly into their pockets on an annual basis. So there's huge incentives for us to be able to solve this problem, or figure out how do we understand this problem so we know where it's going to occur. And so given the data that we have at Omnitracs, we have about 1 million plus assets a day that we're tracking. So these IoT devices that are out in the world on trucks or trailers, things like that, we can see where the trucks are going and how long they're waiting at particular locations for. So we have aggregated this data, and everything that we do is anonymized and aggregated. So we're very careful about the privacy of the actual drivers and companies that we're engaged with. But we're able to aggregate this data and then use it to inform what experiences are like at a particular location. And we believe that we can bring transparency to the industry where it doesn't exist today. So for example, if I'm a trucking company and let's say a supermarket offers me a load, I'll price it based on what I think the service requirements will be. But if I knew that my driver was going to be held up there for 10 hours because they generally get backed up on Wednesdays, then I might price that differently, or maybe I wouldn't accept that shipment at all. And that's really the piece that's missing today, is there's no transparency around what it's going to take to actually service a shipment. And so we believe that the business value here is that we can help trucking companies make better decisions when they're taking shipments. It'll help them price them better. And we think overall it will force the industry to get more efficient on the way that they are moving freight. So when the day comes that nobody wants to pick up a particular shipment because they know they'll get detained there, it will force that company to kind of assess, why can't we get drivers in and out of here quickly? And hopefully they would remediate those issues.
And as someone that watches far too much Ice Road Truckers, I am aware that extreme weather is obviously a huge problem, and much more of a problem over there in the US and Canada and beyond than it is here in the UK. So do you have any examples of how it can be used for weather alerts too?
Yeah, that is a really interesting topic, especially right now. We're in fall here and we're heading into winter, and so everybody starts thinking about weather right about now. There's definitely there have been really a lot of advances in weather that can help drivers. So when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is I look at the weather to see, do I need to wear a sweater today, or is a t-shirt okay, et cetera. But for me, I don't really need to know really specifics on the weather because for the most part, I'm staying right here within, a 5-block radius of my house. For a driver, weather is obviously much more important as it impacts the road conditions, where they're driving, what speeds they should be going at, what their visibility might be out in front of them, and so on. So we've been working on a weather alerting system that's similar to the type of in-cab alerts we send for things like COVID, where we can look at where the driver currently is, look at what's ahead of them in the direction of travel, and then send them alerts based on, road conditions that may not be so conducive for trucking. So, for example, one of the alerts that we sent to a driver was letting him know that there was pretty bad rain up ahead. Visibility would be low, the roads would be wet, and by sending him a proactive notification of this hyper local weather. So we're not looking at weather for a particular city or county. We're looking at specific weather, within a small radius around where the truck would be. And so we're able to send them things that are super relevant to them. And in this case, with the driver that was about to encounter rain, it gave them an opportunity to situate themselves for that encounter. So the first thing that they needed to do was get out of cruise control. So if you think about trucks and fuel efficiency, they would like to squeeze out every last ounce of fuel per mile that they can get, because trucks consume a lot of fuel. So they generally are trying to drive in cruise control when they can. So this alert gave the driver notification that they needed to come out of cruise control, go to manual driving. And it was a matter of minutes before the driver reported that they were in this torrential downpour, and were so thankful to be able to have that advanced alert. So when you think about problems that drivers of large commercial vehicles have relative to what we experience as kind of passenger drivers, it's a totally different world, and they need a lot more of this information in real time to help them stay safe.
Wow, it's incredibly cool. And if we do have any decision makers or techies working at a haulage firm, for those people listening, how does it all work? Can you tell me a little bit more about the tech that makes it all possible?
Absolutely. At the core of all of this is usually our hardware device that sits inside the truck. And from there, we're receiving all of the data that's coming off the truck, the diagnostics, information about things like speed or potentially faults. And so this device is generally in all of the trucks that we're receiving data for. So the hardware device, this IoT device, is pulling the data. It then has a communication link back into our environment. So as I mentioned earlier, when Qualcomm started and created this Omnitracs product, it was using satellite networks. Now with the prevalence of cellular networks, we rely a lot less on satellite networks. Usually we're connecting over cellular networks, but there are still places, remote places, that trucks need to go that cellular is unavailable. So things like oil fields or really kind of remote areas of the country where cellular coverage, maybe isn't so strong. So we use our communication links to get that data from the truck back into our back-end processing environments. And it's there where we're aggregating and anonymizing this data, and then starting to apply things like machine learning algorithms to the data, so that we can take the data and create insights for it that we can then surface back to the driver. And really one of the key pieces of surfacing this information back to the driver, I think we all are aware of issues of distracted driving. And so, that certainly applies to drivers of passenger vehicles as well. And so what we rely on in the cab is our technology has text-to-voice capabilities, so that as we're sending this information to the cab, we're not expecting the driver to have to look down, for example, at a mobile device or things like that to get the information. It's read aloud to them by our devices, so that the drivers can stay safe as they receive these alerts.
Incredibly cool. And I'm conscious it has been a pretty crazy year for everyone in whatever industry that you're working in. So as for you guys, what have you learned this year from leveraging technology and overcoming a new range of challenges? And equally, excuse the pun, but we are talking about trucking here. What excites you about the road ahead?
You had to go there, Neil.
I had to go there, sorry.
This is a really exciting time for technology in the trucking space. When I started in this industry, nobody really cared about trucking technology. And it was a very kind of niche kind of part of the industry. And now everybody is talking about it. So it's really just crystallized the importance of the work that we're doing. So we have had a fundamental belief that location intelligence is critical to take the friction out of the work for drivers. And this pandemic has really highlighted that, not just from the COVID alerts work that we've done, but for example, things like location intelligence about how a particular warehouse is responding to this. So what we've learned is that at some locations, a driver needs to show up and have a mask on. At other locations, if the driver had been to a particular state over the last week or two, there were different procedures in place for those drivers. And so I think when we see real world examples like this, we realize how important it is for us to aggregate this data and provide it to drivers, because at our scale, we can do that much more efficiently than the drivers can do it on their own, or even even the largest trucking company can't do this at the scale that we are able to do this. And so we really feel this obligation to the industry, where we need to take the data that we receive on a daily basis and use it for good to help improve the lives of the drivers that are out there on the roads.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today. I've learned so much. But before I do let you go, for anyone listening that would like to find out more information, can you just possibly point everyone in the direction of where they can find Omnitracs online and the best way of contacting your team?
Absolutely, and we love to talk about this stuff. This is what we do for fun. So, Omnitracs there's no K in it. I'll give you that clue. It's omnitracs.com, and you can Google that and go to the contact us page at omnitracs.com. For me personally, I'm certainly available on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/MYARIV. And I'd be happy to talk about this to any of your listeners.
Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And there is a lot of headlines out there around technology replacing people. But listening to you today, it's a great example of how truckers are working alongside technology to make their life easier. And it is a lot of complex technology there, but I love how you put it in a language that everyone can understand, or should I say more palatable. But I don't. So all left for me to say is thanks for joining me today, and keep on trucking.
Oh, thank you for having me, Neil. I appreciate it.
There was so much in that conversation there that I love, because for the most part, we are all face down in our phones or focusing on our busy lives, and do not stop to think about everything that needs to happen in that supply chain for your essential goods to appear in your store and eventually your home. And hearing about tech like location intelligence, weather alerts, as well as technology that informs truckers of stay-at-home orders, mask requirements and restaurants and rest stop closures is such an eye-opener. And I also loved hearing about the tech, of course, but also how it's helping those unsung heroes, the truck drivers, move those essential products around the country and indeed world. So if you are a truck driver listening to this podcast today, first of all, I salute you all. And please, let me know where you listen and wherever you're driving to. And on your next rest stop, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Let me know what you thought of today's podcast, what you liked, what you don't like, the kind of technology that excites you and the stuff that doesn't. Whatever it is, my door is open to each and every one of you. Or should I say cab? But I think we've had more than enough trucking puns for one day. So I better go before I get myself into trouble and stop myself from sharing any more dad jokes. But that's it for me. So thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.